Okay, good morning everybody in the room, and good morning to you, Chief Constable, and your team. You're all very welcome. And to all of those watching online, thank you for tuning in, if that's the right word. Members have a range of items to discuss, and as always, I will keep my opening remarks brief, and I know that you will too, Chief Constable. I'm going to open on a positive note, and that is one of a congratulatory format. And could I congratulate you, Assistant Chief Constable Chris Todd, on your appointment as Humberside's Chief Constable. You've made a significant contribution to policing in Northern Ireland during your service, including as your role as temporary Deputy Chief Constable in seeing the service recover through the data breach. So thank you for that. I have absolutely no doubt that you will excel yourself in this new, very high-ranking leadership role, Chris, and we all do wish you every success. So good luck. Chief Constable, we have also had discussions regarding the appointment of a new ACC, and we will confirm that shortly as well. Could I also, at this point, congratulate all of those who were recognised in the recent Problem Solving Awards, and the board was very pleased to support those awards, and I know there have been other award ceremonies recently around Northern Ireland, and of course tonight the Federation will host their Bravery Awards, and it's great to see so much positive work being very well recognised across the police service. I'm going to move now to the recruitment campaign and resourcing, including resourcing and officer numbers. Since we last met, the final figures for recruitment were published, and of course now as we move to the next stage, which is the important bit in terms of who makes it through to appointment, you will recall there was much discussion around vetting, and hopefully you will comment on that later on in the day. Good news also that the recovery business case has been approved by the Department of Justice at this stage, and has now gone to the Department of Finance for the second stage. So as we approach the beginning of the new financial year, we trust that the necessary approvals come through, and you have, as you have outlined in your report and in the current picture, we'll see that then. It is welcome that this week's publication of the Programme for Government recognised the need for officer numbers to grow, as well as emphasising the importance of ensuring that there are adequate resources within our justice agencies to respond to and to deal with crime. This includes seeking to achieve a sufficient number of police officers in line with NDNA New Decade New Approach commitments. So we now need to stay focused and show the day-to-day impact of current resourcing levels and getting a plan agreed with the executive to address those issues. There are many other commitments within the Programme for Government to helping to make our community safer, and particularly in respect of tackling violence against women and girls. We also trust the independent review announced by the Justice Minister recently will assist all of those involved in the public protection field going forward. Finally, since our last meeting, we have condemned a series of assaults against officers, and we do trust that they all make a speedy recovery. So over to you, Chief Constable, if we can have some brief remarks, and then we will move on to questioning.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your comments so far. And good morning to everybody online and to the board. My accountability report this month again sets out the broad range of excellent police work that's happening across Northern Ireland. There have been significant reductions in recorded crime, which I'm sure you've noted, which in the 12 months from the 1st of February of 2024 to the 31st of January of this year showed crime down by 9.2% compared to the previous 12 months. And antisocial behaviour, which is such a scourge to so many people, is down by 3.6% over the same period. The seizure of £6.5 million of suspected Class A and B drugs on Monday demonstrates yet again how effectively our officers continue to work with communities and our international partners to tackle the importation of drugs into Northern Ireland. I want to pay particular tribute to the Angiolini Síochána for their support in that particular operation, and this comes in advance of a forthcoming joint crime conference between our two organisations. The relationship between the organisations, I don't think, could be any more productive. February saw, as you mentioned, our student officer and corps handling recruitment campaigns come to a close. I'm delighted that in a very competitive job market, we were able to attract 4,822 student officer applications and 587 for the corps handling positions. It really is positive to see such a large number of people expressing an interest in serving their communities and keeping people safe by joining the police. These numbers increased significantly from the last update I provided to the board. It's my ambition that we will have a recruitment process at least every year, if not that we achieve an ongoing and open recruitment process. We're now working toward bringing these candidates through the assessment process as quickly as possible. I wish all of them well as they enter what will be a rigorous selection process, and very much look forward, as I'm sure the board do, to welcoming them as new colleagues in the organisation. This campaign was an important step for the PSNI. We desperately need the support of these new officers and staff, which will bring real benefits to the entire organisation. The recently published 7th report of the Independent Reporting Commission, the IRC, made clear that a strong policing response remains fundamental to tackling and ending paramilitarism. We have a very productive relationship with the commissioners, and I welcome their report. The IRC sets out the crucial role of neighbourhood policing teams in effectively dealing with paramilitary activity. I share their and communities' considerable frustrations at the constant requirement to extract neighbourhood policing officers to other areas of policing. I promise you we would not do this if it was not absolutely necessary. Simply, we have no choice, as we need to deploy these resources elsewhere to deal with wider risks to the organisation. And this is a consequence of our dangerously low and unacceptable numbers. No one knows the value of neighbourhood policing more than the people sitting beside me. Quite simply, we no longer have the numbers we require to police Northern Ireland. Anywhere else, those statements would be headlines. The fight against paramilitarism also requires detectives to investigate and to manage intelligence. It requires specially trained and equipped search teams and officers who are able to respond to public disorder. You'll be aware from the recent recovery business plan that we submitted that we have fewer officers in all of these specialisms than we've ever had before. The IRC too have acknowledged the importance of properly resourcing the fight against paramilitarism and have correctly highlighted the significant under-resourcing of the Justice Department compared to other departments in recent years, and how this is impacting our ability to deliver vital services. Next month, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire Rescue Services will deliver its annual report on the PSNI's effectiveness and efficiency. From the early conversations with the Inspector, I believe the report will again, and I emphasise the word again, set out our critically low police numbers and the impact that's having on keeping people in Northern Ireland safe. I expect the board will reflect many of the concerns I have previously raised with regard to our ability to protect vulnerable people, manage dangerous offenders, and provide victims with the services that they deserve. These are the inevitable consequences of years of underfunding in the face of growing demand and changing complexities. Like many who doubtless responded to the programme for government consultation, I await reassurances similar to those provided to Health yesterday that these independent reports setting out the unacceptable policing numbers and the consequences to our society will be provided, not just because so many independent bodies have stated this, but also because your Chief Constable keeps repeating it. The programme for government published this week is asking for plenty from policing again in terms of collaboration, speeding up justice and enhancing public safety. We will play the best role our numbers allow in the key priorities of ending violence against women and girls and creating safer communities. However, it's crucially important and fundamental to the security of Northern Ireland that a sufficient and more sustainable funding settlement is achieved for policing if we are to deliver these priorities. I did not see any explicit executive commitment to that in the document. I do welcome the programme's commitment to growing officer numbers and supporting our recovery business case. However, as I've said when the document was in draft, I do not feel the programme for government properly reflects the level of crisis in policing in Northern Ireland, and I will keep making that clear until it is addressed. I would welcome clear statements from ministers outlining support for the recovery plan in the terms of both numbers and funding. I do believe that I've been heard in broad terms about resourcing. It is my belief that there is a cross-party political acceptance that the police service has been severely underfunded and allowed to shrink to unacceptably low numbers. However, actions speak louder than words. That is why it's disappointing the executive have missed this opportunity to provide clarity and to strengthen its commitments to properly resourcing this organisation. There's been much publicity about the funding levels quoted for cutting health waiting times, which I do welcome, but no such reassurances have yet been provided for policing. The implications of our reduced workforce levels and continual budget pressures are certainly severe, but please be in no doubt of how serious this really is. We are at significant risk of failing victims, local communities and our own workforce. This is dangerous for a society which continues to emerge from the traumas of a post-conflict environment. And every time I come before this board, there are examples of that in what's happened in the previous 4 weeks. Not only have I called out the dangerously low policing numbers since my appointment in October 2023, I've been supported by the HMIC FRS, as I've already mentioned, the Independent Reporting Commission, the Criminal Justice Inspectorate for Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. We are now very far from the executive commitment of New Decade New Approach to 7,500 officers. I do worry that it will take some catastrophic event to wake everybody up to the reality of our policing numbers and lead to the investment that's required, which is relatively small with regards to the public service spend. Last month, violent, distant Republicans attempted a brutal murder in broad daylight on the streets of Belfast. This is obviously unacceptable, and our detectives are working hard to bring those responsible to justice. This provides another example of the unique policing challenges in Northern Ireland that require sufficient officers to tackle. And in recent weeks, we've seen several district PCSP community engagement meetings disrupted by protesters linked to distant Republican groups. This too is unacceptable. The right to freedom of speech and of assembly are fundamental human rights. They're protected in law and allow individuals to engage in peaceful protest. However, these rights must be balanced, and the need to uphold the rights of others, protect public health and safety, and minimise disruption to normal life, and the need to prevent and detect crime. Again, such incidents are unique to Northern Ireland and demonstrate the real need for world-class neighbourhood police officers to support communities and problem-solve local issues. We need to recruit the officer numbers we've lost in recent years to put into those neighbourhoods. For the avoidance of doubt, when my officers are called to help people in dire need, such as the recent house fire in Dungannon, where 4 lives were undoubtedly saved, or to protect people facing danger, which happens every single day, they do it in the same determined, professional way for whomever is calling for our help, whatever their background, whatever their culture, whatever their race. We are dedicated to looking after all communities. Following the disruption at one of the district community safety partnership meetings in North Belfast on the 25th of February, 2 men aged 40 and 30 were cautioned by police, and a file is currently being prepared for the Public Prosecution Service for public order offences. We're still examining the circumstances surrounding disruption caused at other meetings, and will review our plans to ensure an appropriate and proportionate policing plan is in place for future events. Once again this month, as mentioned by you, Chair, I find myself having to condemn violence faced by officers and staff. Northern Ireland was shamed again during the course of one weekend last month when 9 officers were injured while on duty in Derry City and Strabane. I'm incredibly proud of the dedication and resilience each officer showed as they all remained on duty, even those who went to hospital, determined to continue to serve their community. I've spoken to each officer, and that determination to protect the public and get in harm's way is actually something that is beyond inspiring. We are incredibly lucky to have our officers and staff. I'm grateful for the support of this board and the Justice Minister in their condemnation of these attacks, but I remain alarmed at the apparent tolerance and indifference that exists in society. Such permissiveness does not exist elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Policing requires our officers and staff to handle difficult and hostile situations, but attacks upon them should never be accepted. An attack on them must be seen on an attack on society as a whole. I'll continue to work with the Department of Justice, seeking sentencing guidelines for those who've carried out assaults on police officers. Some of you, and again you mentioned this, Chair, for which I'm grateful, attended our recent Problem Solving Awards and our International Women's Day event. These were really impressive celebrations of our staff and the high quality of work they do for our communities. I want to thank all those involved for organising those events and the board for your support. And finally, I'd like to offer, as you have done, Chair, all of our sincere congratulations from the senior team and the organisation to Chris Todd, who has been announced as the preferred candidate in the selection process for the Chief Constable of Humberside Police. Chris's support to me personally and everybody sitting beside me has been remarkable. He's been a crucial member of this service executive team, and it's only right his leadership skills, which he demonstrated during management of the data breach, have been proved to be the reason why he's been selected to be the Chief Constable of Humberside. So we wish Chris every success. Now happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Constable. And on the point about police numbers and officer numbers, this board will continue to support you to lobby for more resources for that cause.
Thank you.
Before we move to questions from members, can I remind members again of the need to ensure that their questions do not stray into individual misconduct cases or ongoing police ombudsman investigations, or indeed ongoing judicial proceedings or involve personal data. So I'm now going to take the first question from Peter Osborne, and that's on PSNI representativeness.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chief Constable and team. I want to come back to the question of recruitment and representativeness as from last month as well. And I suppose preface it with 2 comments that I assume everybody here will agree with. First of all, that there has been a really positive engagement and change in terms of representativeness of policing in Northern Ireland around gender and community and ethnic background. And can I congratulate everybody involved in moving the dial in the way that it has moved over a number of years. Let's look positively at where it is at the minute. And I think secondly, that I'm sure everybody can agree with, that a genuinely representative policing service is something that we can all buy into, believe in and support. I think the journey still to go is a journey for all of us, whether it's wider society, the policing board or the PSNI or others. So what more can we all do in your view in years to come, as you've talked about recruitment taking place, to ensure that there's even further change positively in terms of representativeness of policing?
Well, firstly, thank you for the question, Peter. And this is, because we've not recruited since 2021, it feels like we're at the start of a new journey around the recruitment process. I mentioned in my opening remarks, the position I'd like to achieve is that we have an ongoing open process for people to apply to join the PSNI. And the reason I say that is we interact with communities across Northern Ireland every day. And often, because of what our officers do, and I could talk about some of the examples in recent weeks here for far too long, and the chairman will get very frustrated. But those interactions cause people to want to join the organisation, but we haven't got an ongoing process that allows them to. So I think firstly, we need to have a position where we can strike while the iron's hot. When we've made a difference, a positive difference to somebody's life, that we can encourage them as champions of the organisation, all of our organisation, to encourage people to apply. I think there's a personal responsibility on everybody in this room and everybody watching online to appreciate the challenges of policing, and we will get things wrong, but that it's everybody's business. Everybody in Northern Ireland should want policing to succeed. Conscious of the comments that there are a very small minority, I made in my opening remarks, who clearly don't want us to succeed. But if you even think about those events that they sought to interrupt, they were partnership events with us, trying to work with all different communities to tackle drugs, violence against women and girls, and social behaviour. Policing is a profession that makes a difference in a way no other profession does. We need to get that message across. We're looking at a plan of events now to try and get into younger people, schools, colleges, universities, to try and get the messaging that I'm describing now across to the future of this society. I don't think you can ever do this early enough with regards to potential recruits. As you know, we've done a huge amount, and I will pass the microphone to Claire and Pamela, around a myriad of engagements and special events, real events that we've had great support from this board at, targeting specific groups who are not sufficiently represented in the organisation. But I am actually more encouraged than most people, perhaps by some of the levels with regards to protected characteristics and underrepresented groups that we've had apply for the organisation. And as the chair said, the important data is who gets in. What does that look like? How do we change things? But be reassured that we are open to any suggestions, and we see it as incumbent on us to do everything humanly possible to improve the representation of this organisation. And it's the age-old Pelian principle that the public are the police and the police are the public, and we have to represent all our communities. For some of the details of what we've done and what we're proposing to do, I'm going to hand over to Claire, and then perhaps give Pamela an opportunity to remark as well.
Thank you. Peter, as you've already stated, obviously over the last 10 years there has been some improvement in the representativeness of our workforce demographic, but we know it remains a challenge. So the actions that we're taking fall really under three areas. The Chief Constable has talked about one of those in particular, which is around candidate generation and recruitment. And we know how valuable all of the events that we have been involved in the last number of months leading up to the current recruitment campaign have been very important. So work under our Here For You engagement strategy, our reference engagement and listening events, all of the recruitment outreach that we do with areas that we know are underrepresented, and obviously then how we advertise those so that people are aware of the great meaningful career that policing can give. The second area really is around improving representativeness for the current workforce and what we're doing internally to create a culture of inclusion and belonging. So that stretches beyond the areas of focus that maybe the policing plan has directed us to, and recognises that it's much broader than just a number of different categories, but that we recognise that having a diverse workforce will mean that we're better at problem solving, that it will help us identify if there are barriers for particular groups internally. And a lot of the work that we've been undertaking in the cultural audit going forward will be focusing on inclusion and inclusive practices. So we can celebrate the fact that we have people with caring responsibilities who have got neurodiverse conditions of different sexual orientation. We've got people with different thinking styles and preferences. So diversity and inclusion broader than just the categories that we record in our workforce demographic data. And then finally, we also do look at our leaver information to see, is that having any impact on the makeup of the workforce, and are there any learnings from those who leave or feedback from those who leave that might make us consider any different actions that we can take as well. We also partner with Diversity Mark as an external organisation to help us building some of those activities, and obviously the role of our minority support associations and our diversity support associations, they are key in helping us to create an inclusive workplace, and we're very grateful for all of the work that they do in partnership with us. So those are just some of the ways that we are focusing and will continue to focus on having an inclusive and diverse workforce. Finally, I think, in your question, you were saying about what more can we do. I do think there's an opportunity for us to rebalance some of our message as well about policing being a great career, and actually focusing on the fact that to be a police officer, we're wanting to attract people who have got what I think in the skills agenda this today is called the transversal skills. So people who are great at problem solving. That's actually doesn't matter what where you come from or how you identify. We're looking for people who are great at problem solving, who love working with others, and I think that's a really important message that we give as we try to change that workforce demographic.
Chair, can I say one more thing very quickly? Sorry. I think we need to be braver, Peter, as well. So I was going to mention this today. We are working with a local production company. And you might know I had quite an involvement in a programme called 24 Hours in Custody in a previous role I had to show the human side of policing, the challenges of policing. And it had an incredibly positive effect on local confidence in policing and recruitment from diverse communities. And we're looking to do the same here. And we've started that work, but it's incredibly difficult here because of the security here. And this is a different operating environment. But I think if we can show people the true PSNI, which often I don't think is reflected in the media, what people do day in, day out, and some of the footage that we've seen from the work so far is extremely moving. I think that will have a huge impact, but that's very much in the early phase of what we're seeking to do.
Okay, thank you for that fulsome answer. I'm going to move to a supplementary from Gerry.
Thank you, Chair, and let me start off by saying the welcome the fact that the real engagements are going on. I've been to one or two of them myself, and the internal current, which Claire mentioned, I'm more interested in sort of detailing that, not just at the moment, but detailing that there, because I do think that representativeness has to go to every level. That's one of the difficulties internally in terms of representativeness, and then the leaver information as well. However, and you did mention publicity at the end there. What I wanted to do was come in, and this has been in the media about vetting, and I've asked about it before, but we are in a, if you like, a cybernetic age. We are in social media. It has a big effect on all sorts of things, and some of the things that were said before here, briefly, and then in the media, is around this, and it has been disappointing. I mean, I welcome that it has risen to almost 5,000 who have made the applications, but of that, I think 27 points, something maybe nearly 28% only, is Catholic, and the social media I wanted to answer this specific thing after saying all that. So on the social media, it is saying that there's if there's certain social media, if people have said things which they disagree with the police on, if they I would like to explain what that means. If first of all, if it's true, and then what it means. Does it mean that if you are you go to a commemoration for a relative, or even not for a relative of someone who has died, if you're connected to a Sinn Féin member, if indeed if you are a Sinn Féin member or a supporter, do these things count? Because that is the essence of what has been said in the media at the moment. Thank you.
So I think it's a helpful question, actually, Gerry, and I know we've discussed this before. So since we last spoke about this, I established that in the last 2 recruitment processes, so not the one we're currently going through, okay, previous recruitment processes, 3 people of all those numbers, which is many thousands, I think it's 10,000 Bobby's just suggested to me, 3 people failed the vetting because of solely what was on their social media accounts, 3 people. If you weren't able to become a police officer because you disagreed with the government or something the police did, I wouldn't be a police officer. I think that's probably frank to people. So it's not about that. It's about values. It's about what we would expect from people around the standards that we want in policing. So it's beyond showing a particular position on agreeing or disagreeing with something that might have happened in the public domain. It's about language. It's about some of the things that you see online where there is clearly predatory, abusive, concerning behaviours. It's difficult in this environment to go into specifics, but there is a panel that will assess these issues if there is a concern. We then have Sir John Gillan as a point of appeal who will look at any cases where people feel that they have been unfairly treated. And vetting is so challenging, and I don't think there's anything between us on this, because policing has found in recent years where they have cut corners with vetting. They brought people in who should not be police officers, and that is causing significant challenges and has caused reputational issues in policing in recent years. And the Angiolini report, which we may speak about today, has said that the key to the issues that we found with people like David Carrick and Wayne Cousins was the vetting processes. And we are very much signed up to the 16 recommendations in that report. So to reassure you, if somebody comes from a particular background, and that's any background, because there's all sorts of new and emerging communities in Northern Ireland that we want to be part of this organisation and may have a view of policing traditionally, that will not impact on their ability to be a good police officer, and that will not prevent them from being a police officer. But let me just hand over to Bobby, because I know we've been doing quite a bit of work in this space to make sure that we get the dial in the right place. So let me just ask Bobby to see if he wants to add any comments.
Now, well, really just to build on what the Chief said, I mean, every case will be taken on a case-by-case basis. If during a vetting process there is information that emerges on social media that gives cause for concern, and again, we've previously been clear that the sort of things that we'd be concerned about are misogyny, racism, sexism, sectarianism, or homophobia. I think everybody on this board would be concerned if somebody coming forward for a career in policing was displaying material of that kind of nature. But anything that we see that is of concern, what will then happen is that the subject would be invited for an interview with the service vetting unit, and then they would take the content of that interview to the independent vetting panel that the Chief's talked about, or sorry, the vetting panel, which I should say incorporates an independent vetting panel member who is actually selected by the Northern Ireland Policing Board as well. So there are a number of checks and balances in this process, right up to and including the role of the independent assessor to make sure that it is a fair, transparent process that everybody can have confidence in. And I thank you for the question today, because I think it's given us an opportunity to surface it. I think some of the examples that have been given in the public domain are significantly unhelpful in terms of providing reassurance to people that this is a career for everybody. It's been useful today to be able to set out what the reality is in terms of the vetting position.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Linda on the question of reports of the sexual offending of a Chinese national.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Chief Constable. Obviously, you'll be aware of the highly publicised case of a serial rapist who has been convicted and is believed he may have drugged and raped over 60 women. This man was a student here in Belfast in Queen's University, I believe, for 2 years. So can you give us some details on any work that's been done by PSNI to establish if there are indeed any victims or potential victims here of this prolific offender? And what, if any, other bodies are you working with to establish that?
So yeah, you'll have seen the headlines yesterday, and there was a commander in the Met called Kevin Southworth who did the media yesterday on this case. Firstly, you know, our thoughts go to the victims and survivors of this awful offending. So the Met have been in liaison with the PSNI. The trial has only just concluded. It was a jury decision to convict him. The Met lead on this, and they've been in contact with Queen's University as well. I had contact with Kevin yesterday and again this morning. Kevin, who's the commander in charge strategically of the inquiry, and the SIO are going to come here. But thus far, and they've been very focused on establishing if there were any offences in Northern Ireland, we haven't seen that there's any offending here. However, the very nature of the fact we've now got the publicity, which we couldn't have before because that would have prejudiced the trial, is again an opportunity to appeal for anybody to come forward who may have any concerns and have known this man around what he may have done. And I'm sure from the reporting that you'll have seen, the issue is that many of the victims do not know that they're victims. And the MPS have got a number of pieces of evidence where there are clearly victims of rape, and those individuals do not know that they were victims to this man. So I would appeal to anybody who met him or in any way was alone with him in any of the circumstances that we can understand where somebody may have been in his accommodation, which has been investigated by the Met, but this is another opportunity to reinforce that they come forward and speak to us. So we're in close dialogue with the Met. That will continue. Davey Becker's been very much involved with the team on this. But I'll just hand over to him to see if there's anything he'd like to add.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. And I think it is a really good opportunity to address what is a really shocking case and what has emerged in the reporting over the last few days. Again, just to emphasise the point that detectives from our public protection branch have been liaison with the Metropolitan Police Service and have been in contact with the detectives investigating the case. As you say, the suspect was a student in Queen's University Belfast between 2017 and then moved to London in September 2019. Certainly at this point, and I would emphasise at this point, we have not identified any victim or offending as yet in Northern Ireland. However, our liaison continues with the Metropolitan Police Service, as the Chief says, so we view this very much as still a live investigation in that regard. And I think it's important that we do use this opportunity to really appeal to anyone who feels that they have been impacted by this case or by this offender to please make contact with ourselves. They will be supported by detectives, especially trained detectives from Public Protection Branch. The Metropolitan Police Service are also developing a wider messaging in respect of this case, and that will be particularly aimed at international students, because we feel that, again, many of those students may have moved beyond where they were studying across the world. So that will be a focus moving forward. Again, I think it's important to remind the board of the work that we have undertaken under our Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan, and in particularly the work that we have done recently in terms of our Power to Change campaign. And I think this is important that we continue that work, particularly with schools, universities and colleges right across Northern Ireland, and we are doing that, and that's about safeguarding students. We're also live to The survey in 2022 that was conducted by Ulster University and Queen's, which found that 63% of respondents had encountered some unwanted sexual experience. So I think that drives us forward in terms of that work with universities, with colleges and with schools to continue to safeguard students, and that really underscores the need for enhanced support systems right across all organisations. Comprehensive education, which again our Power for Change campaign is part of, but also robust investigations that we will take forward in terms of perpetrators, that we really need to work collectively to promote that culture where students can and do feel safe.
Thank you, appreciate that. Just in terms then of, has there been any direct contact with the university or with any other organisations that may have come into contact with potential victims? I'm thinking the likes of Nexus and...
Yes, that is ongoing, yes.
Thank you. I'm moving now to Les Allamby on question on hate crime.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, while welcoming the reduction in hate crimes across sexual orientation, sectarianism, disability and transgender identity when compared with the previous 12 months, I note with concern the significant increases in race hate and faith-based and religious motivated hate crime. And I wonder if you could outline what strategies and approaches PSNI is adopting in these areas. And I'm particularly thinking about liaison with public housing providers to ensure that the allocation of tenancies can be enabled and supported, and that incidents such as the locals only around Roden Street can be prevented in the future.
Yeah, Les, thank you for the question. We've spoken about hate crime before, and obviously events of last summer and the work this organisation is doing, and being no doubt hate crime is a priority for this organisation, as you well know. And I will comment, I think it's right to, about the disgraceful and cowardly graffiti that you've described that has no place in our society whatsoever. So we continue to be represented on a multi-agency board that's led by the Executive Office to address the critical conversation regarding race hatred and housing. So areas where housing allocations are made is shared with stakeholders, including the PSNI, to allow us to forward plan to ensure the safe introduction of new residents into areas where they will be minority communities. To reassure you as well, Les, and we've discussed some of this before, but new operational guidance has been developed and rolled out, which has resulted in a significant number of anti-immigration displays being removed without adverse response. And Peter has spoken at previous boards about the removal of such items. And further to that, we have engaged with the reviewer of counter-terrorism, Jonathan Hall, in relation to seeking additional legislative powers to help us remove such material and material from prescribed organisations. And we are consulting regularly, but specifically on these issues, with the Department of Justice with regards to reforming legislation to give us more powers to deal with these things. As you are aware, the board are aware, we have seen an increase in both race and faith-based hate crimes, which you've alluded to. And this particularly increased since the autumn of 2023, largely following a trend nationally across towns and cities with significant Muslim and Jewish communities. The hate crime control strategy that we have was reviewed, and that happened again after the events last summer, with the following aims now in place as our priorities, which is to increase actual reporting of hate crime and incidents through an increased confidence in policing. You'll recall I've spoken at this board about meeting many families who previously not reported incidents. and we need to address that. Also, to improve the standards of service that we give those as victims of hate crime. And it's something I've spoken to the Victims Commissioner about. And obviously, being victim focused is one of the strategic priorities in the forthcoming policing plan. And finally, to ensure we get better outcomes for victims, that is not just criminal justice outcomes, but wider outcomes as well. But Stephen's here joining us today from local policing, and they've done a huge amount in this particular space. So I was going to invite Stephen, and I think Bobby might want to make some comments on this as well, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chief. Yeah, we are continuing to try and increase our performance in this area, and the most notable pieces of work we're conducting include joint campaigns with Crime Stoppers to really develop the information and intelligence we have around those conducting hate crimes and to bring those potential offenders to justice. We continue to fund our hate crime advocacy service to make sure those victims of hate incidents and crimes get the support they need. We continue to conduct regular internal audits to make sure our performance internally and how we're dealing with victims and securing justice for those who suffer hate crimes is maintained and against our service instruction. We've also commissioned an internal review to see how we compare not just across the UK but across Europe in terms of our outcome rates for those racially motivated hate crimes. And we've also revised our internal service procedure on victim and witnesses who have an immigration status to make sure they feel comfortable and have confidence in coming forward to report crime. In addition, PSNI has worked closely with the Home Office to identify places of worship that were vulnerable and provide enhanced security under the Home Office Protective Security for Place of Worship scheme. We've done that in a number of venues right across Northern Ireland. And while it's not the role for police to allocate housing, we do have an essential role in engaging with partners to make sure we identify housing or concerns or sensitivities in areas which may impact on those looking to reside in those areas. And we continue to engage with both settled and new communities in an attempt to break down barriers and the misunderstanding between them. This is a huge amount of work by our neighbourhood teams. Is what we deliver every single day. I'm really proud of the work that's being delivered. And if you're content, I'll hand over to Mr. Singleton.
Yeah, very little to add, other than to say, Les, that we actually met earlier this week as part of the Community Safety Network, which is a cross-executive body, and actually the theme that had come from our tactical assessment for the year was actually hate crime. So we were discussing that with partners, and again, in the course of that meeting, there was further discussion about the potential for a forthcoming revised racial equality strategy from the Executive Office. So again, very keen to make sure we stay connected with partners, and hopefully we end up with an all-executive strategy to be able to tackle the issue more broadly across society.
Thanks, all three of you. I really welcome the initiatives and the amount of engagement and involvement that PSNI has with others. I guess, and I don't underestimate for a second the challenge, but one of the things we clearly need to do is to make sure that the idea of there are no-go areas for housing for certain communities doesn't become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's a long-term educational issue, as well as kind of work with the housing providers to embolden them to make sure that working with the communities that doesn't happen. And that's my worry, and that's where I'm really keen to see the kind of work that PSNI does. And I did a ride-along, my latest ride-along recently, and racism in a local area was one of the issues that just occurred on a Friday night. So I know how difficult it is to deal with this in practical terms, but it's just a challenge that we can't shirk. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Brendan Mullan, our Vice Chair, for a question on professional standards.
Thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, further to recent comments from the Ombudsman's Office with regard to delays in disciplinary processes, can you advise the Board how many officers, if any, are currently suspended from duty pending disciplinary for periods of 1, 3 and 5 years?
I can, Brendan, when I find the right page.
6.
Right. So thank you for the question, and I saw obviously comments in the media recently with regards to this, and I have to say, firstly, importantly, I'm very concerned about delay with regards to these investigations and cost public money of these officers when they're not actually working, going through these processes. And we have done a huge amount to try and reduce that, which I think Bobby will assist with. The data is as follows. 0 to 1 years, the breakdown of officers suspended as of the 4th of March was 14 officers. 1 to 3 years, 21 officers. 11 cases of those officers, there are now ongoing criminal proceedings, so just over 50%. 3 to 5 years, there are 8 officers suspended, 3 cases where there are ongoing criminal proceedings, and 2 cases that are pony cases that have not yet been submitted to the PSNI. Finally, over 5 years, there is one officer suspended. That is a pony case where there are ongoing criminal matters. If I just introduce Bobby though, because we've been talking about trying to see how we can streamline some of these processes from a PSNI perspective. So I'll just bring Bobby in, if I may.
I just want to acknowledge at the outset that Chris had prior to me taking up this role, done a lot of work just around suspensions and again challenging ourselves to make sure that we were only suspending in circumstances where it was appropriate to do that, and that would be very much in line with the police conduct regulations as well, which are very clear that prior to even looking at suspension we should always consider the option around redeploying an officer. But in cases where redeployment wouldn't be deemed to be appropriate, so those are cases where we think there could be an interference with the investigation, where it could be prejudiced, or having regard to the nature of the allegations, the public interest would require that people are suspended. Those are really the criteria in which we would be looking into this category. So, as the Chief has said, 44 officers currently suspended. Just to put that into context, I mean, that's less than 1% of the officer population within the organisation. It's actually about 0.69%. But the annual cost of the suspension of those 44 officers, if we take them as the current cohort, we believe would be in excess of about £3.5 million in terms of the total salary cost of those officers. So it is something that we really do need to keep a very close eye to in terms of making sure that we're appropriately utilising people. But I have to state again, in this cohort, we're talking about allegations of very serious sexual offences, domestic violence and serious dishonesty and misconduct in public office. So you can see again that these are really people that, because of the nature of the allegations, have to be outside of the workplace. The Chief touched on it. There's only one person in the category over 5 years, so that suspension is now run for 7 years. As the Chief said, it's a pony investigation with a trial date still to be set. So you can see, Brendan, why the Ombudsman would have been raising the issue around having fast-track powers in certain instances, because that case has been now running for a considerable length of time. Overall, when you look at the 44 cases, and the Chief set out where they currently sit in terms of the criminal justice process, more than half of those cases sit outside of the PSNI, whether that's with PONI, PPS or the court system. And that's why, in terms of tackling this issue, we have to work collaboratively with our partners in the DOJ, PONI and PPS. And we are doing that. We have a meeting set up actually to look again at how, at the various stages in what is a pretty linear process at this stage, how we might be able to actually accelerate some of the timescales around that, in order to not only make the system more efficient, but crucially as well, preserving the fairness and integrity of it as well. We're very firmly of a view that if we can speed this up, it'll actually be in everybody's interest, including those that are subject to misconduct investigations.
Chief Constable, Deputy Chief Constable, thank you for that. I don't think anyone on the board would be critical of officers being suspended under the circumstances. The issue is the length of the suspension and the lack of progress in terms of bringing the disciplinary process to a conclusion. Now, I can understand, so there seems to be 2 blockages. One is within where there's a potential criminal justice outcome. What I don't understand is, the the threshold for proof for a employment issue would be lower than a criminal issue. So I don't understand why the person can't just be dismissed. Well, I do understand the regulations don't allow it until the criminal process is expedited, but perhaps you could explain what we need to do to get rid of that so that people can be dismissed for disciplinary issues and the criminal system can go on at its own pace. So that's one question. And then the second question is, there are 13 officers that are not part of the criminal justice process. And what is the blockage within the PSNI system that is not allowing those cases to be brought to fruition, as it were? So there are 10 officers up to 3 years on suspension, and there are 3 that have been suspended for 5 years. I just don't understand why those disciplinary processes haven't been completed.
So I should say that in cases where the evidence is deemed to be irrefutable, there is the option of moving to a special case hearing with the Chief Constable, and we do exercise that option where we feel the evidence allows us to do that. I'll be candid, Brendan. I mean, the biggest issue for us again is about resources. So it's back to the overriding issue around the overall underinvestment in policing. If we had more resource to put into professional standards department, we could speed up these investigations. As it is, some of the investigation teams within the department are operating at about 40% of the strength that we would like them to be able to. But in order to put more resource in there, in today, that basically would require taking detectives away from public protection branch or other investigations. So effectively robbing Peter to pay Paul. So through our resource allocation management meetings, we are doing our best to try and balance those competing pressures against the organisation. But this is something that, as we continue to reinvest overall in policing, that we would expect to see a benefit from. But I think it also underlines, once again, the inefficiencies that exist in an under-resourced policing service. You're creating additional costs, avoidable costs elsewhere, by not having the right number of officers in the first place.
Chair, can I just mention something? What we have tried to do is, I think because of events that occurred in the Met with people like Cousins and Carrick, we all became extremely overzealous around officers getting things wrong, which caused us to say to officers who made mistakes, everything is potentially gross misconduct, and it isn't. It's a mistake, a genuine mistake. And that clogged up the system. A system that's already overburdened. What we have done, and Chris did a lot of this good work and Bobby's carried it on, is reset that. So that shows trust and faith in the officers, who probably just need to be spoken to by supervisors about how they could have done things in a better way. But what I suggest would be a good thing to do, and I'm very happy to undertake this, is that we look at those 13 specific cases to see what can be done, if anything, that we're not currently doing, because I do understand the point.
Thank you, Chief Constable. I think that would be very helpful. A very quick supplementary on professional standards again, and it is in relation specifically to the abusive position for sexual purposes. And Chief Constable, you've already mentioned it in the meeting, the Angiolini report, which obviously arose from the murder of Sarah Everard and the investigation into Wayne Cousins, and the clear weaknesses within the vetting process that allowed him in the first instance to be appointed as a officer despite a history of violence against women. The Angiolini report has made a raft of recommendations, and I think just in terms of public assurance, it would be helpful to know the progress within the PSNI in implementing the recommendations within the Angiolini report, and in particular the recommendations around strengthening vetting, particularly with regards to sexual deviance and violence against women and girls.
So, yeah, thank you for the question. Also, thank you for setting out around the sort of context of the Angiolini report. There are actually 3 parts to the Angiolini report. Part 1, report to February. Bobby alluded to the work Chris has done. Chris picked up this. Chris took his responsibility. There were 16 recommendations to policing. We very much were part of ensuring that we supported and responded positively to those recommendations. So there is nothing in those recommendations, other than one thing that I'll mention here today, that we find challenging. A number of the recommendations are actually for the College of Policing or National Police Chiefs Council, which leaves about 10 recommendations for organisations like the PSNI and other forces to look at. They're within our gift to address. We accept all of those recommendations, and by and large we have complied with the requirements of them. The one recommendation which we've not accepted at the moment, and there are things that we think that we might be able to do to partially address this, is the practice of mandatory home visits to applicants. And because of the context of Northern Ireland and the obvious sensitivities of doing home visits for applicants, and we've talked about the need for confidence across all communities to join the organisation, that is one of the only recommendation that we are currently unable to fully sign up to. And when I joined the organisation, there was a home visit, but you'll understand why that's more challenging. The remaining recommendations primarily relate to vetting issues, and they've been largely completed by the PSNI. We've publicly committed to being an anti-sexist and anti-misogynistic organisation with something that we have developed and every officer and member of staff is to sign up to, which is our statement of intent. And they are not words, they are behaviours. You have to live, breathe and mean the statement of intent. The draft amended, updated Code of Ethics for the organisation is currently with the board for consideration, and it makes clear to all of our staff their right to privacy can and will be fettered in certain circumstances, some of which are alluded to in your question. The PSNI vetting that we conduct remains compliant with the authorised professional practice, the guidance from the College of Policing, and that's with regards to the new vetting code of practice that has come from the Angiolini report. Bobby's mentioned it. One of the things that we want to do is, once people are vetted, that it's not a standstill process, that we can dip sample. We can be proactive around randomly selecting people to recheck in our vetting. That is something at the moment that we aspire to do, but we simply do not have the resources to do. And at the moment, especially because of the recruiting process we're doing, you'll understand that our vetting capability is entirely focused on dealing with the vetting for those recruits. But that's something that we are looking to try and ensure that we can introduce in the future. Bobby, I don't even want to add anything.
Yeah, just to provide some reassurance just around the home visits. I think that arose because a number of UK forces, especially during COVID, were in a situation where they were basically having no face-to-face contact before people actually arrived in the organisation. Our recruitment and selection processes are different here and have been for some time, notwithstanding the sensitivities that the Chief has touched upon. So it's on that basis that we've been in a position not to accept that recommendation, but we will obviously keep that under review, especially as we continue, hopefully, with year-to-year recruitment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nuala, you have a question on this subject as well, yeah?
I have a supplementary, but before I start, I just wanted to say something positive because there isn't a question on it, is that this week, over the past week, there have been multiple mental health crises in hospitals, primarily in the Belfast Trust and others, and I know that Ryan has actually taken the lead in facilitating and at times forcing the trusts to actually play their part and step up to the mark. So I just wanted to recognise that, because we are facing crisis after crisis and with mental health, and it is not the PSNI's job, but I just wanted to put that on record, that I think it should be recognised. But just moving on to my supplementary around professional standards, it's going back to the misconduct issues, and there was some worrying news from my perspective in the media this week that the president of the National Black Police Associations has been placed under misconduct investigations because of a tweet which was deemed, or a complaint that was received and then deemed that it was potentially political activity. But it really strikes an imbalance between other organisations, not just within Northern Ireland policing, but elsewhere too, in the tweets that others also do and seem to receive no complaints or misconduct investigations. And it just brings me to the question that is there a disproportionate number of police officers within the PSNI who come from either a black and ethnic minority background or indeed also a Catholic background who are under misconduct investigations compared to the overall proportion that are actually within the PSNI? And my other question is regarding those PSNI officers who have the ability to retire while still under misconduct investigations. Should that be allowed? Because we received an answer to a written question at Performance Committee, and there was an alarming number of police officers, while still a small percentage of the overall force, who are allowed to retire to, essentially, from what I see, escape misconduct investigations. A number of those officers and a number of the officers you've mentioned today in relation to the Kitty Simpson investigation too.
Firstly, thank you, Nuala, for the acknowledgement around Ryan, because we've had some battles this week, and obviously we need to work with our partners in health, but that's been challenging, so it's good of you to acknowledge that. With regards to, the Chair mentioned at the beginning, the caution around talking about cases that are ongoing, but I want to reassure you around the particular case you mentioned. I spoke to the officer last night. I have an extremely good relationship with the officer that you're talking about. He has an extremely challenging role as the president of the National Black Police Association, an organisation that I have a very close relationship with and have had for a number of years. I used to be the policing lead for race. I'll get into trouble for saying what I'm about to say, but I'm often getting into trouble. I don't necessarily understand the issue with the tweet, but that will be looked at. I know he is. He's feeling that it's a disproportionate approach. All I can offer you at the moment is that there is an investigation. There's no finding of a breach of the Code of Ethics at the moment. He's responding to the complaint. The complaint came into the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman provided that complaint to us to deal with. Let's due process take its course. But he's in a wickedly difficult position where he's trying to advocate for his members. And, I think that should be acknowledged. Obviously, anybody who tweets anything that is prejudicial to proceedings, that is, as Bobby's described, hateful in any way, misogynistic, racist, sectarian, we won't accept that, and that will be dealt with properly and quickly. But we just need to let this take its course. But I want to reassure you that he's had reassurances from me with regards to where we currently are. And I've probably already gone too far. Bobby's probably going to kick me under the table now, but I'll just bring Bobby in if he wants to say anything on that.
It just in terms of that due process, and maybe just the 8 members. So there's a stage in that process, much like the Ombudsman's investigations as well, where an officer has a right and an entitlement to be alerted to the fact that they are actually subject to investigation, and then they're invited to be able to provide a response to those allegations. So that's what's known as a Regulation 16 when it comes to police misconduct, and that's the kind of territory that we're talking about. So very early stages. Just to go with what the Chief has said. In terms of your question around potential disproportionality in misconduct proceedings, so we do have figures on that. I just don't have them available to me at the minute. So I'll maybe reserve from saying anything just at this point for risk of having to later contradict myself. But it's something we're very alive to, and actually have proactively sought to understand, in part in response to what some of our minority staff associations have said.
And I think that would be helpful.
Sorry to talk over you, Nuala. What I can say, I know that those figures are completely disproportionate across policing. I can't give you our figures now, but there is a real evidential case around the disproportionality, particularly around race, of officers who are under investigation for disciplinary issues. And that's a perennial issue that goes back many, many years. Just on your second point, if I may, Nuala, around the the fact that officers who are under investigation can retire. This is one that I'll probably bring Bobby in, and Chris may want to comment on it because of the work he's been doing, but this is something that frustrates me. It's a real dilemma because sometimes these inquiries, and it goes to Brendan's question, take so long and people are being paid and the likely outcome is very minor. So it's almost like, is it worth keeping these people when they're not going to face any particularly strong sanction for so long a period of time? And there is a number of balancing exercises to take place there. Almost so they can just sit out and carry on getting paid when we know that we don't want them in the organisation, but it's taking too long to exit them. So if they want to retire, let them go, in effect. But I'll perhaps just ask Bobby or Chris if they want to make any comments on that.
So the limiting factor in this, as I understand it, is the regulations. And I think the ability to prevent retirement only exists if somebody is suspended. And there are recent examples, I know for Chris and I, where officers who have suspended have applied to resign, and we have denied permission for them to resign until such times as the misconduct concludes, because the whole point of the regime is public confidence. So we're aware of that. Chris, I don't know if you want to say anything further.
Yeah, that's the issue in essence. It's the discrepancy between the police regulations here in Northern Ireland and those that you would see in England and Wales. So in England and Wales, they've been changed to allow misconduct proceedings to continue after retirement, and the officers will be brought back for misconduct. There is ongoing liaison with the Department of Justice to look at the regulations in Northern Ireland with that intention. But as Bobby says, in most serious cases, we would expect the officer to be suspended anyway, and that does allow us to potentially prevent the retirement away from misconduct, so to speak. But of course, they're then being paid a salary, and that's public money, for the purpose of the misconduct proceedings and not to deliver a public service. So there's a balance to be had there, and the answer really is to have the regulations which support misconduct beyond retirement.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move to Peter Osborne on the recent disruption at PCSP meetings. You mentioned that earlier on, Chief Constable, in your opening remarks. Peter?
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to ask and have the discussion in the private session as well, Chief Constable, if it suits. But I think we're all agreed around the table that good policing serves all people in all communities, especially when they're at their most vulnerable or when they need help most. And we have seen PCSPs being interrupted recently. What has the reaction been to those interruptions from a policing perspective, from your engagement with PCSPs and members of PCSPs? Are you concerned that that may do damage to relationships between police and local communities, including with the PCSPs? And what can be done to ensure PCSPs continue to engage in the community-based work that they are there to do between local communities and policing?
So, again, genuinely, thank you for the question, Peter, because this goes to the heart of what sort of society we want to live in, I think. Firstly, the short answer is the great work of the PCSPs continues at pace, despite attempts to disrupt recent public meetings. As an indicator to that, on Monday, which was the 3rd of March, the Belfast PCSP brought together all the district PCSPs to discuss ongoing issues around antisocial behaviour. And that meeting took place at Girdwood Hub, which was the site of one of the public meetings that was sought to be disrupted. The meeting was really well attended by political members, independent members and statutory partners. There was around about 50 people there, which is a really positive sign. And I think that demonstrates that despite attempts by a very, very, very small minority of people, the valuable work and the appreciation of what the PCSPs do and the continued support for the membership of those groups that remain strong. What I'm not oblivious to, and what I understand, obviously, is that there will be some anxiety caused by what we've seen. And I'm happy to talk in a private session and give details about the 3 meetings involved. What I will say is I think the chairs and the policing response was admirable in allowing people the right to say what they wanted to say, but then getting on with the business. And for the avoidance of doubt, I mentioned in my opening remarks the cautions of 2 men. I'd love to get inside the minds of these individuals, because what they're seeking to do is stop people working together to protect our children, to protect women who are feeling vulnerable, to stop drugs impacting on society, to stop antisocial behaviour. And that, in effect, I think, sums up the position. Where do you want to be? And I think there's something of a watershed moment here, that there are legal processes that we can use to deal with these people, which we will use. Some of it, I think, is they just want a headline to be seen to be marched out by the police to play into some bizarre narrative that they might have in their own minds. The narrative they should listen to is, look, if anything happens to you and you call 999, if anything is occurring in your life where you're under threat, we will come and we'll do everything we humanly can to look after you, to look after your children, to look after your families, to look after your community. The whole attitudes are simply outdated. And I think the reaction online has shown that. Has shown that these people just have basically no credibility, and nobody really wants those attitudes. We want them to be part of making Northern Ireland a safer place for the next generation, including their children, next generation. So I'm very grateful to all the PCSPs and the membership of the PCSPs for everything they've done. The local feedback we received after the disruption at the Craigavon Civic Centre on Thursday, the 27th of February, to be a bit more specific, was incredibly supportive, with several of the councillors from a range of parties encouraging the police and thanking us for how we managed the disruption. There's been no indication of any change in behaviour or concerns raised from local communities around engaging in the police as well, which is really, really important. So at present, no significant impacts have been noted, although of course I have mentioned my concerns about the anxiety this would have caused, but no concern in the majority of districts whatsoever, and the work continues. To reassure you, we will continue to engage with all parties through the board, of course, with a view to producing more comprehensive guidance for the chairs of these meetings to deal with this kind of activity. We're also now looking at creation of a PCSP members safety forum, and just a mechanism to provide more reassurance with regards to supporting members of our PCSPs around specifically this type of behaviour, and also guidance to our officers around what to do so that we present a consistent approach when we're planning for these events. So again, it's one of the nuances of living in a post-conflict society, but I was looking at some data around paramilitary activity, and in 2010 there were 40 shootings, paramilitary actions. Last year there was 1. We are making progress even if people don't see it, and that's what everybody should focus upon. But let me just bring in Stephen. I don't know if he wants to say anything, because it's his staff who managed so many of these incidents when they occurred.
Thank you, Chief. Just at the risk of repeating some of the matters the Chief brought up there, so there has been no significant impact we've detected across PCSP meetings. Indeed, over the last few days there's been 6 PCSP meetings which have been really well attended and delivered the core business expected of them. We're very grateful for the PCSPs, the members of the community and our partners in attending those events, and we're very grateful for the professionalism, dedication and resilience you've shown over the last couple of days to keep those events going. They're really important to the community. They're really important to us as in local policing to understand and address the community safety matters that matter most to the communities we serve. And as the Chief alluded to, we're working with board officials to develop other support mechanisms for our PCSP members and their staff to make sure any of the concerns they have are alleviated. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Chief Constable and Stephen, for your support.
Can I just make a comment on that? I welcome the fact that there's been no significant change in that engagement. I was at a PCSP meeting in Belfast 2 weeks ago, where it was very clear that meeting was empowering local communities to both challenge back and push back on policing issues, as well as get them engaged in policing issues, was really constructive because of the honesty of the conversation. I think it's really important that those communities are brought into those conversations, and so if there's no significant change, that's very welcome. It harms local communities' engagement on these significant issues when they're deterred, or there is an attempt to deter them from engaging with the police. And it's not all about positivity, it is also about what needs to improve, and those are welcome conversations from my perspective.
Just to add to that, Chair, and I think you probably all know anyway, each of the chairs of those meetings allowed those people, those protesters, to say what they needed to say. And that's important. So yeah, thank you for your comments, Peter.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Trevor, I think you have a supplementary on this, please.
Well, yeah, I suppose maybe the first question will be, and I know, Chief, you've referenced to Girdwood, but that wasn't the first of these attempts to disrupt. So was the police action come after the social media, or had the police action started before social media campaign? Because the timing of the Girdwood looked a wee bit like reactive as opposed to the social media, as opposed to reactive to the event. The second point I want to make, and I've heard what you've said, Chief, about freedom of speech. I think freedom of speech is important, but I think there's a balance struck between freedom of speech and intimidation. The nature of what was said at that event was pure hatred and intimidation to those people in the room. So I'm not sure how you can balance that as free speech. But I do welcome your comments in terms of how you're proactively looking at this going into the future. Because one thing's for sure, and lots of conversations have been talked about recruitment, there's no doubt in my mind this type of action from that particular section of the community is putting off similar people from that community. Whenever you see the recruitment numbers down to, recruitment applications down to 27%, I think that speaks directly to it. People from the Roman Catholic community are in fear of those people who come on to those meetings and hijack them. And as I say, it's intimidation, it's not freedom of speech.
So I'm grateful for the commentary. I understand what you say, and we're probably very close together on this, but I'm a different John Boucher now. So we'll let them talk. But I said society needs to move on, and we're leaving them behind. If they commit criminal offences, they'll be dealt with. Trevor, believe me, I think you understand my style and approach to this, and I made that very clear to poor old Stephen, because I was away last week when I saw what had happened, and that is the approach. I can't give you details, quite frankly, about when we started doing what. I think they obviously, in the first couple of meetings, came in and nobody perhaps expected it. We then got much firmer in the third meeting, and we're very much prepared to deal with them now. If that's helpful. I do agree with your point about the recruitment issues. I met an officer who was severely injured in an attack recently, and he said to me he'd been reading comments in the media by commentators because of our recruitment campaign about what we need to do. And he said, Chief, this isn't about you. This is about society. This is about the political parties actually stepping up to support policing. Now, I slightly disagree with him, and he's an amazing man, because we've always got to do more. We'll never be doing enough, and we've talked about some of that in this meeting. But there is something about society not accepting these behaviours. We'll legally deal with them, and not allowing these people who, frankly, I have very little time for, but I want to take everybody with me in society. Not letting them intimidate them. Sorry, Bobby, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so just to say that, there was definitely an escalation between what happened in West Belfast on the Monday and then what happened in Girdwood on the Tuesday. When people turn up masked, for example, that clearly is intimidating and threatening. And that's why, again, we adjusted our operational posture for the Wednesday. But look, we've looked across all three incidents for evidence of any offending, and we will follow up on that.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Gerry for a question you have. Go ahead.
As you know, Chief Constable, there was media reports and allegations that there was surveillance of Donald McIntyre, who's doing a programme and I think a book on the Noah Donoghue death and indeed the investigation into it by the police. And I mean, clearly it's very worrying. I know it's an allegation, but the police put out a statement to it which basically said, you know, if anybody's any complaints, go to the investigatory powers tribunal, which I don't think is adequate. And I just want to know, I mean, what people will want to know, and it is travelling. As you know, the case of young Noah has been over 4 years, has huge, and his mother, Fiona, has huge support. And of course, this will traumatise her. But the worry then is, was there surveillance on Donald McIntyre? But was there surveillance on phone? Was it when conversations with Fiona Donoghue? And was there indeed anything in that? Now, it said that this was in August 2023. I understand you came in about 2 months after that, but this is current. This is not a legacy issue. And Noah's case was not a legacy issue. And unfortunately, I do remember a previous Chief Constable allowing for PIIs on this case, which I still don't understand. So it's to try and give some answer to that. And I understand what the Sheriff said at the start, you know, these are ongoing investigations that hold you back as well. However, I don't think that when it appears in the paper that waiting for the McCulloch report is the best way to handle this. If there is an answer, if you can give an answer, I think now's the time to give it publicly because it's important.
Okay, thank you, Gerry, for the question, and I will give an answer. I'm going to try and hopefully clear this up, conscious that, and I will mention the McCulloch review, and there may be other legal proceedings. But due to the commentary, there's been an allegations against the PSNI involving the journalist Donald McIntyre and the adverse impacts on public confidence around that commentary. I think it is only right that I set out the position regarding these matters as I understand them. So, on the 3rd of July of 2023, the Attorney General issued a public advisory note which reminded editors, broadcasters, publishers and social media users that the inquest proceedings in respect of the tragic circumstance of what happened to Noah were currently active for the purposes of the Contempt of Courts Act of 1981. Everybody here will recall there was huge speculation and endless conspiracy theories being promoted online regarding what had happened to Noah. Following discussions in August 2023 between the PSNI, the Northern Ireland Court Service, the PSNI collated material from public-facing online publications on X, formerly known as Twitter, into 2 accounts. All these communications were publicly accessible, but I will accept that the publisher of the post would not be aware that the PSNI had viewed and captured those publications. No journalistic material was viewed or recorded or sought by the PSNI. In line with the Attorney General's advisory note, the material was shared with her office on the 29th of October of 2023. No other force or agency were directed or requested by the PSNI to take any steps with regards to this. I became aware of this on Friday, the 25th of February. I ensured immediately that the information was passed to Angus McCulloch, KC, for his review, to ensure that it would be considered as part of his ongoing work. This allegation is clearly within the remit of the terms of reference, and I am confident that in due course he will give findings in relation to it when he reports. I do believe and this goes to the Chair's comments at the beginning of this meeting, that it's vitally important that Mr McCulloch be given the time to conduct this work and independently look into this matter, which of course he will consider carefully, I'm sure, when he comes to his findings and any recommendations, including in respect of this matter and others. To reassure those who, as a result of this media reporting of this event, to reassure those who've commented that the final McCulloch report from his review will not be made public or will be redacted, I want to reassure the board and everybody watching that this will not be the case and that the McCulloch findings report will be published. That's enshrined in the terms of reference that we've agreed, which refer to maximising the openness and transparency of his review's findings. Mr McCulloch has publicly reiterated his determination that his findings and recommendations should be as open as possible, and I am absolutely committed to supporting that. So in summary, and conscious that the McCulloch review and indeed wider proceedings might result from the speculation and commentary that's happened in recent days, from my understanding, this issue amounts to the monitoring of 2 open source publicly available accounts on Twitter commentating on what had happened to Noah, and it took place to protect the legal integrity of the coronial proceedings in Noah's case. I would also like to add that by me explaining that, I hope any concerns about the PSNI being involved in the breaking into any vehicle will also be now understood not to be correct. There was no involvement in the PSNI of breaking into any vehicle of Mr McIntyre's. I'll say this as head of covert policing for many years. When we go into vehicles, nobody knows we've got into those vehicles, so people should think about that. But of course I understand that the very nature of this would have concerned Mr McIntyre and others. And that's why I think it's important that I avoid any further speculation and say what I've said. And I hope that assists the board. But because of the McCulloch review, which is being done very robustly, and he will certainly comment about matters concerning surveillance, and because of potentially other proceedings that are going to be brought, I really can't comment any further today on that.
Thank you. We're now, I'm conscious we're in the injury, sorry, we're over the normal time that we were supposed to be, but I'm going to allow another couple of questions. Nuala, you have a supplementary on this. I'm going to ask you to be very, very brief, and maybe if you can be brief on your response as well.
Thank you, Chief. I think that is helpful for us today to hear that, and it was important that we did discuss the issue, but I also wanted to draw to your attention there are also allegations that a journalist involved in the investigation around the death of Katie Simpson has also, there are allegations of surveillance there too, so I would just want to draw your attention to that, and if you could also pay the same attention to that as well. And I understand that the McCulloch review is looking at that too, but I think it is also worthwhile of your attention.
Yeah, of course, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Frank McManus on a question on road safety. You okay, Frank?
I'm not okay because I had a comprehensive answer about safeguarding our people on the roads and that. But what I'll probably do is I'll take it into the private session and then see can I get it up the pecking order for the next board meeting, because it was all about safety on our roads with speed reductions that are taking place across Europe and what the implications might be here. So I'll pick it up in the private. I think it's very, very important for all our citizens, and then we can bring it. Unless you want to answer it now, I can go through the question.
I'd like to do it now, Frank, only because I was told this morning that a 10-year-old had been killed on our roads again. And so I think it's such an important issue. If you don't mind, could we ask the question so we can answer it? Is that okay?
Okay, so I was just thinking of time for everybody. On the 7th of February in the Republic of Ireland, they introduced some pretty drastic speed reductions, especially in local rural roads. We're seeing that across all major cities in Europe. We're seeing it in different regions of European countries as well. And the question I had was, would you support these similar type reductions here, or even more drastic, if you like, speed reductions? Is it possible to share with us what impact that would have on our children, on our elderly people, and especially when I research the pedestrians. And in your view, and I understand it's only your view, what can the people in this room do about getting these measures brought in now? I'm not talking about in years to come, I'm talking about getting them brought in now, if you're agreeable with the measures.
Well, firstly, and I'll say again, thank you for the question, because since arriving here, and we've had some conversations about this board, I am staggered by the number of deaths and serious injuries on the roads in Northern Ireland, in fact, on the island of Ireland. And as I said, and I'm sure all of our thoughts go out to all of the families affected by these incredibly sad, but I think many avoidable tragedies, and particularly a 10-year-old child who's just been killed very recently. So our strategic lead for roads policing, Sam Donaldson, has given evidence to the Stormont Infrastructure Committee on this very subject, Frank. He advised that speed limit reductions in built-up areas, especially where there are schools and high levels of pedestrians, on some rural roads where 50 miles per hour may be more appropriate, and on some dual carriageways, should be reduced, and this would be welcomed by the PSNI and will be seen as a contribution to reducing deaths and serious injuries. The number of people sadly killed in 2023 was 71 lives lost, and there's a further 69 lives lost last year in 2024. Motorists travelling at excess speeds continue to be a major issue in Northern Ireland, to the extent that it remains one of the 5 key issues in our Fatal 5 campaign. I know some very strong action was taken in Wales around reducing speed limits that had a huge impact on reducing lives lost. But I'm going to hand over to Mel Jones, who's been driving a lot of the work in this area, if I may, Frank, to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Frank, for bringing this back to everybody's attention. It does continue to be something of great concern to us, the high levels of those that are killed or seriously injured on the roads. And speed is definitely a significant issue on the roads. I think driving standards generally, we all look with horror at what people do and the choices people make. Overall, we are seeing a high number of speed detections around offences that are committed. We've got an increasing number of speeding offences that are detected by the camera vans, and we have a sort of correlating, slightly decreasing number of the speed enforcement that is done by the proactive roads policing teams that are out and about. That is likely reflective of the reduced number of officers in those teams. So it's well rehearsed to board members that we've got 33 less roads policing officers than we did a number of years ago, and as such they have less ability to do the proactive work. And we will very much welcome the support around the changing of speed limits on those key roads that we've identified to the Infrastructure Committee. We think that will be really helpful. It will obviously need to have public consultation, which will have a lead-in time, so that the sooner we start those pieces of work, the better. But of course, it would be remiss of me not to say that if we are going to have reduced speed limits on those roads, we also need to have sufficient enforcement of those speed limits for them to be effective. So the reinvestment into roads policing as the organisation stabilises and starts to grow is also a very important part of that process. The second thing that I would really like to take the opportunity to ask for advocacy on is the increase in the penalties that go with speed enforcement to keep us in line with those levels of penalty that we see across the rest of the UK and across Ireland. So we definitely have lost track here. So a penalty notice for speeding in Northern Ireland still comes with a financial penalty of £60. In England and Wales and Scotland, that's now £100. and in Ireland it's now €160, which increases if you don't pay the fine. So there has to be a deterrent that actually hits people's pockets, and I don't think that it can be right in any arena that you get more for a parking offence in a town centre than you do for a speeding offence on our roads. And again, we've put this as an options paper to the Department for Infrastructure because they're responsible for the level of the fine. But I would ask that you could all advocate in terms of moving that forwards as quickly as possible, because there's no doubt that something that hits your pocket and also the penalty points on your licence are the things that make you think very carefully about the speed that you drive along a road in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, just thank you very, very much for that. Sort of, I think when I was doing a bit of research for that, they were saying that sort of there's very few families in Northern Ireland that haven't been impacted with an accident or an injury on the road. They were giving examples which were startling, like if you're a pedestrian and hit by a car travelling at 20 in a town centre around 30, you're 7 times more likely to die. Which those are startling figures. So if there's any way I personally can support, or I think as we as a board can support, because I may be wrong on this, but I think the current Minister of Infrastructure who could get is our next board member. Yes. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And we are watching with interest. The Welsh Government introduced the reduced speed limits in 2023. And although they haven't done a formal evaluation yet, they are reporting that they've seen a reduction in those killed and seriously injured on the roads of over 100 in a year, which is significant. So we are watching that evidential base to help us move forwards with those legislative changes.
Thank you, Frank, for raising that again, and thank you for your answers. And this board would send our thoughts to all of those bereaved and indeed injured on our roads. I'm going to ask Linda, I think you want to say a couple of words, and then Cathal.
Thanks, Chair Gormil Margaret. And thanks very much, Frank, for raising it. Thank you very much for your response, Chief Constable and your team. And it's something that's very personal to myself. And Chair, I have to declare I'm a member of the DFA committee which received the presentation. And we certainly support the Fatal 5 campaign, and I think it's clearly identified those areas. But my point is, and as I was reading the figures, it's absolutely shocking. 7 weeks in, we're now over the number we've had over the last 3 years in a row. And it's impacting families, communities, and long-lasting impacts on families right across the board. I suppose my question, and in light of some of the responses, Mel, is this to you: what more can we do in terms of working in partnership and in terms of getting the message out? Because unfortunately, the numbers are starting to rise again, and we've a good strategy. We have a road safety strategy which the Minister has agreed on the programme for government to publish an annual report, action plan report in relation to the strategy. So what more can be done?
Yeah, we are just about to launch Safer Steps, Operation Safer Steps, which is about trying to improve road safety for pedestrians. Also Operation Lifesaver. That will come with a significant social media campaign, so we would ask all the board members to help that get as far and wide in our communities as we can. I'm also doing a piece of work around trying to increase the use of out-of-court disposals in a proportionate way. I don't think it can be acceptable that people who commit offences on our roads, which will yield a fine and endorsable penalty points, can often keep a clean licence for up to 2 or 3 years pending court proceedings. So I have developed a paper which we're sharing into the Speeding Up Justice work that's led by the Department of Justice to look at how we can expand the fixed penalty system to actually get the penalty and the consequence of driving offences, where it's proportionate and appropriate to do so, actually onto people's licences and hitting pockets as quickly as possible. So as and when we develop that conversation, further advocacy around that would be really helpful as well.
Thank you. Very quickly, please.
Mine is not a question, Chair. It is just to say, because both of the young people that have died over the last 2 days are from my constituency. In fact, one of them, Callum, from my own town. So I just want to offer condolences to the families of both of those children and say that we will do everything we can to make sure that other families and communities don't suffer what has been suffered over the past couple of days in our area.
Thank you. Here. Thank you. We've one question left. Patrick, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to come in on that last subject.
Massive time pressure. Thanks, Chair. It's just to say we had a presentation from Chief Superintendent Donaldson. I'm speaking as quick as I can in January at Performance Committee. I sent him a picture afterwards, which he found was quite interesting. In Lincolnshire, where I spend part of my time, at the entrance to the county on every major road, there is a manually updated sign, which is manually updated every month. I never believed it could be done, but I've been there 7 years now, and it is, which indicates in red and white the number of deaths on the road last year and this year. Now, I don't know, and Sam said he wouldn't know either, whether it makes a difference. It certainly makes me think every single time I drive past it, and I'm sure it does for everybody else in Lincolnshire. And it's just one other tool that could be used.
So sorry, Mel, I was going to say, I think that's, even raising the question when Frank raised it, that's why I wanted it in a public session. Anything that we can do to get this issue into the public mindset, especially of young people, it is so important. So something like that again, just to make people think before they might take it. It might not just be speed, it might be drink, it might be drugs, it could be just messing about in the car around distraction. That's what causes these accidents. So I would welcome a discussion on us doing something similar to that.
Thank you. And I know I'm going to say again, we are well over time, but these are very, very important issues that affect all of our communities. So I'm going to give them, that's why I've given them a bit of time. I've got a question from Trevor Clarke and then one from Cheryl.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to speak directly to your report this time, which will be unusual at the board meeting. Earlier I talked about negative elements of recruitment. Now I want to talk about positive elements of recruitment. On page 11, the Organised Crime Unit, drug seizures, which is my constituency, so I'm going to be parochial as well. And on page 17, there's the problem solving awards. I don't think there's a comment necessary, but I want to make the point, Chair. These things speak directly to confidence in policing, where you can take thousands of pounds worth of drugs out of a community, or where you can go to another community where race hate has been a real issue. And can I commend the team from Antrim District who came second in the problem solving awards? Those things speak more to recruitment, because those affect everybody from every community. And I think for me, particularly the drugs, I think the drugs is really up there in terms of getting as much of that stuff off the streets as possible. So it's more as a positive note for a change.
Not for a change, Trevor. You're more positive than you realise.
Cheryl, sorry. Next question is on online sexual offences against children under 18. And Cheryl.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Chief Constable. I just want to touch on the statistics within the report. So between January and December 2024, there were 329 recorded online sexual offences where the child or the victim was under the age of 18. So my concern is that this is already significantly underreported, and there's obviously never been a greater time for that education and for the space to encourage reporting and awareness of obviously of these crimes. So firstly, I have a few questions around this, so I'll try and be as quick as possible. But firstly, do you see the new online reporting portal as a way that we can encourage these crimes to be reported? I think it can be used from the age of 16. How does the figure compare with the previous calendar years, and what PSNI resources allocations have been used in cases and investigations, and how has that varied in the past years?
So firstly, this is an area that I know everybody will be hugely concerned about, because suddenly predators who previously had to physically be near children can now reach children anywhere, because every young person seems to have a device, and the world has changed as to how we communicate. One of the key issues here, and I don't want to keep beating the resources drum, but I've seen some incredible packages that our officers deliver to schools around education and awareness online. If we haven't got the officers to go in those schools, and I know teachers, I know those involved in education do a huge amount to ensure that children understand the risks. I'm sure so many parents do. But we have got some tools that are so powerful, so carefully designed, that it really does ensure that these children and young people are far more alive to the risks of what they're walking into and keeps them protected. And we need to have those community officers in those schools doing that work, and we need the funding to do that. And that's when I talk about more people in Northern Ireland are becoming at risk than elsewhere in the UK, because other forces have far more officers than us, and they've got less risk. So they can have dedicated schools officers. You don't have them. Why is that? And they're the sort of hidden harms that people just don't pick up on. What I do want to do, I'm going to look at Ryan, and I know Stephen might want to come in around some of these key issues, but this is an area, again, even by raising the question at this board, Chair, and I know we talked recently about young people, there is still a lack of awareness or a level of complacency with people responsible for children about what they're doing online. Every time they go online, they are vulnerable to being exploited. And once there is a lever against that child, and we've done a lot in the PSNI to highlight these issues, but once they're being exploited, the harms that can occur, the young suicides that we see and the increase in numbers directly related to the internet are incredibly worrying. And even the McCartney case recently, where we saw abuse on an industrial scale globally, obviously was the tragic suicide of a young girl in America because of what she was being asked to do. Let me just bring in there, I think Ryan and maybe even Stephen want to add some more comments on that.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Cheryl. And I really do want to emphasise how good the online reporting is that we offer to the public now. It's being more and more used because people want to contact us in different ways. It's really simple to use. It integrates directly into our systems, and it is treated exactly the same way that as you choose to pick up the phone and call us. It's dealt with in the same way within our call handling centres, and you'll get the same response in relation to it. And it allows you to report specifically around all crimes, but also issues of antisocial behaviour, road traffic, collisions, and there's discrete and bespoke reporting around domestic abuse. So it's a really, really good system if for those who don't want to pick up the phone and call us. And to the point in terms of young people, we all know that they want, they might be uncomfortable about picking up a phone to talk to somebody who they don't know about an issue that is very personal and close to them. I know my own kids would certainly be that way, and the ability to be able to do it by reporting it online, I think, is really important. So I just want to stress what a good system it is. The feedback on it is excellent, and we want to say to people, use it. It's as used in the same way as you pick up the phone and call us.
Sorry, Chair, can I just go to Davey, not Stephen, because I think I've covered the issue on schools. Is it all right if I just bring Davey into that question? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Cheryl. And again, I'll try to be brief. But yeah, it's a really concerning and an expanding area of concern for us. To answer your question directly, do we have enough officers in that area of business? No, we don't. But you've already heard our pressures in terms of resourcing, and this is where we do have to get that balance right as we move forward. So I think this is another area that the more officers we have, the more choice we have in terms of where we put those officers to address those particular concerns and emerging risks. That's why we've committed in the new policing plan to report to you in terms of cybercrime, and this will involve this type of activity so that you're aware as a board in terms of new emerging threats, what we're doing about those, and some of the pressures we face in terms of how we address those particular areas. But just to reassure you, our detectives are working really, really hard in terms of the detection and the investigation of those offences, working closely with our partners in the National Crime Agency. But also we're ensuring that we utilise our officers right across the departments in terms of executive action against those who are causing the most harm. So those groomers that are out there, we're coming after you, and we've made significant arrests over the last number of months, and that activity will continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Constable. That was the final question for today, and I suspect some of these discussions will continue in our private session. Just a lot of the discussion today shows how important it is for us all to be victim focused. There's been a lot of discussion around victims today, and that remains an important aspect of all of our work, and it's obviously reflected in our policing plan. And indeed, the importance of adequate resourcing has come up almost at every question. So, and we will, as I said earlier on, continue to lobby for additional resources for the PSNI. Could I now thank you and your teams for taking questions, and all of the PSNI for all of the good work that you do in keeping communities safe. Thank you to all of those who have joined us online. And that concludes today's session. Our next session is on Thursday, the 3rd of April 2025, when we will be publishing our new policing plan